All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at CQ Advocacy for our latest webinar, Finding Your Super Advocates and Using Influencers. Delighted you could join us today. Got some great guests for us. We have Joshua Habursky, who you'll know as the Independent Community Bankers of America Director of Advocacy. He's also the Grassroots Professional Network Chairman. And we also have Amos Sneed along today, the partner at S3 Public Affairs and co-founder of Famous DC. And Amos has spent many years working with leading print, television, and online journalists to counsel clients on digital communications and media strategies. So delighted to have him here today. We don't have Megan McCoskey here today. Megan is actually out on the West Coast, but I'm going to go through Megan's slides so we don't lose any of that good stuff she had prepared for us. And I'm Ann Dermody. I'm the Content Marketing Director here at CQ. So I'm going to hand it over to Josh first to get rolling.
Certainly, very exciting topic and great guest. I hope I can learn from Amos and implement it in my day job. Some of the stuff that he has been doing with both Famous DC and S3 has been admirable, and for the industry for us to really replicate. So I'll start by going over a common concept in influencers and advocacy, the ladders of engagement. And there's several iterations or variations of this, and this is one of the ones that I think resonates really with the advocacy community. You look at the cost, effort, and commitment, and then you have low, moderate, to high. And you can take any one of those tactics that you see in advocacy and place them in one of those categories. So you might start with an influencer with a low barrier of threshold as tweeting or retweeting or liking something, any type of social engagement that can be done in a matter of seconds. Then you'll go into the more moderate, writing a letter, a custom letter, and then into the high threshold of actually meeting with members of Congress or being a spokesperson for an issue area. And that is, an increase in cost, effort, and commitment. And that can go along the lines of your general advocates as well as your influencers that are, have a heightened presence. Here's another iterations of the ladders of engagement. You have happy bystanders that really just listen to what's going on. You have donors that contribute money, whether that's your PAC or just donations to a charitable cause or nonprofit organizations. The spreaders, the people that go out and spread the message, and they'll repost something on their social networks encouraging people to take action or write a check or contribute in some other way. And then the evangelists, that's direct solicitation. You're going into your email contacts, you're going into your Rolodex, so to speak, and asking others to participate, and become involved and establish a relationship. And then the instigators, those are your creators. Those are at the top of the spectrum, at the top of the ladders of engagement. Those are your influencers that will grab people and get them on board to whatever you're doing. So identifying advocates, there's several ways that you can do this, and this should be nothing new to most of the folks in advocacy who've been there for a number of years, but advertising, I know CQ has a paid acquisition program. There's other outlets that you can advertise, on the roll call website or other media outlets and pay for those acquisitions and get people that are interested, subsets geographically, issue areas, or people that match a specific demographic that you're trying to target. I think one of the often overlooked ways of identifying influencer or advocates is internal advocacy. In a lot of associations, you have several departments: membership, conferences, marketing, communications. Sometimes there's walls in the association world and in the corporate world where you and government relations are on this high pedestal in Washington, D.C., and the rest of the organization doesn't really know what you do. So I think a lot of identifying advocates from larger organizations is going into the different areas within the organization and say, hey, give this a shot. We need you to write a petition. This affects your bottom line. This affects your livelihood. This affects your job and your family, whatever it may be. But drive into the organization itself. Retargeting, this goes along the lines of advertising. If people are visiting your website, have some display ads up there so that you can go and ensure that they follow through. In this retargeting, we do this a lot in the Grassroots Professional Network. If people are going to our site and they aren't registered for an event or they are not signed up for our email list, they'll get retargeting ads. We work with a lot of great partners, Campaigns and Elections, Magazine, on our retargeting efforts, and we've seen exponential growth over the course of almost 3 years using a lot of those techniques. In the direct advocacy world, coalitions, I think that's another way to identify advocates. You might not be succinct and have perfect alignment on every issue, organization, but if you're on a coalition that is doing a lot of work on, let's say, E15, the ethanol debate, you can identify some influencers or advocates that might work for your organization on that specific issue. And that goes into segmentation. If you're trying to maximize your output on issue to issue, your general advocate pool is going to be very different from your issue to issue advocate pool. Social activists, there's people that are online constantly browsing through Twitter, on Facebook, that just are political activists. They're around the country that, really resonate on certain issues, and you can go out there and identify them. If they're posting about it, if they look at the hashtags, if they're a reoccurring commentator on a specific issue, go out and ask them, hey, will you retweet this? I think a lot of times people are fearful in advocacy to make the ask. You're never going to get a deal, you're never going to get an advocate, or you're never going to be successful in mobilizing people to action if you can't make that ask. People with a vested stake in your issues. I think that, that goes hand in hand with the social activists, but also people that are general commentators. There are going to be conferences and different forums around the country that are talking about your issues. Those are areas where you can find thought leaders that are talking about best practices and recruit them to become super advocates and influencers for your organization and cause. Going into super advocates, take action. These are the folks that take action no matter what the issue is. There's people, even in your general advocate pool, that will they'll send the form letter no matter what. They'll call the congressman no matter what. They'll meet every lobby day. These are your super advocates. A lot of times the intricacies of the issues don't necessarily affect them, but they're still highly vested in your organization and they're your brand champions. A lot of times these super advocates will come from committees. If they're active in the organization and association, they're involved, they're giving their time and effort, those committees will often be your influencers. Events, education, and premium resources. If people are spending money towards your organization, they're more than likely to be an influencer and to go out and provide additional time in addition to the treasure that they already support. Folks that give you ideas and feedback. A lot of times people will give you unsolicited feedback. I think every organization will have the contact form, and occasionally you'll get something submitted that you have to kind of query and go through and triage it if it's an issue. The best thing to do is to explain what is at hand and turn any of those negative comments into your influencers. They are watching this issue, they're interested, and they're going to take enough time to write a complaint or call attention to something to you. Go back and try and get them to become involved and active and get their input on this. Notable industry experts, so your folks that have a vested stake, a vested financial stake. You'll have vendors and consultants that are related to your issue areas. Those folks can help amplify what you're doing if asked properly. Your executive leadership, they have a lot of clout. They have a lot of Washington reputation. So getting them to be your influencers is also an easy ask because they're within your organization. So send emails out, calls to action with your chairman as the signatory or your president and CEO as the signatory versus yourself as the advocacy director. I always like to rotate things and have different people as the email signatory. a lot of times just general advocates, and you can segment it state to state. If you have somebody that's, you know, in Colorado that is a notable activist for your cause, have them as the signatory because they can relate to the regional and local audience. And again, coming back to people that are willing to spend time and treasure. So using influencers, there's obviously some risk and reward there. I know that I have attached a PowerPoint presentation on some of the more intricacies on the FCC guidelines on endorsement and disclosure. You have to disclose compensation or any perks that you may receive. This is more dealing with celebrity influencers, and I think that you know, I've used them in past organizations to help advocacy cause and spur activity and reach for that, but there is also the risk and reward. You might have a spokesperson that does something wrong, gets in trouble with the law, and that can look bad for your organization, guilt by association. So there's some interesting social media disclosures, and I won't go into those. You can reference that PowerPoint, and also industry-specific rules. A lot of stuff in advocacy, you'll try and generate some activity through contests and prizes and different ways of rewarding your advocacy pool. And I would highly encourage people, if you are going to run some type of contest and prize program and you're going to utilize a celebrity especially, please consult the FCC guidelines on that, because there are some things that you wouldn't even notice. For instance, I had no idea from the beginning that photo sharing, just posting a picture with a product, is equal to an endorsement. You have to disclose that if you're receiving some type of compensation for it. Then, of course, I'll turn it over to the master of famous DC, Amos Sneed.
Hey, Joshua, thank you for this, and thank you for having us today, and thank you for everyone who has joined this webinar. So my name is Amos Sneed. I am a partner at the public affairs firm S3 Public Affairs, headquartered here in Washington, D.C. S3 is a bipartisan public affairs firm, and we take an integrated approach to influence. What that means is we have a combination of government relations and public relations all in one house. And as we've seen, and we've actually bet the farm on this, is that we believe the influence game has changed. You cannot just have one public affairs campaign as a standalone. You can't have one government affairs campaign or government relations campaign as a standalone. They actually have to work together and be generally integrated. So we spend a lot of time at S3 to try and stay in the front of that debate. What are the latest tools? What are the latest technologies you can use? And digital has opened up an entire new world for influence. And I think in some ways you're seeing a lot of the city catch up with that. So we're here today. I want to talk to you a little bit about Famous DC. Now, Famous DC, we started about 9 years ago. It covers the intersection of media, politics, and digital, and it has a real focus on Washington, D.C. Naturally, that's where we are. This has grown into a bigger platform that now reaches about 3.2 million people a month on all of our platforms, including the website and all the social media channels. 60% of that audience is in the Washington, D.C. DMV area. 60% of the D.C. audience are millennials. So what does that mean? It means that they read our content on their phone 2 times to 1 as compared to their desktop. So now we're competing with very short attention span, and it's got to fit on your computer, on your phone screen, so that you can scroll up with your thumb. So that really challenges us. So our content has to be concise, it has to be compelling, and it has to be consistent. So those are the 3 C's that we use, and we have taken what works on the Famous DC platform and applied it to what we do in the public affairs world. So if you think about Famous DC, I mean, nobody comes to work in the morning and in order to do their job has to read Famous DC. I mean, when you come to work and you may have to read CQ Roll Call to do your job. You know, there are publications and there are websites that you have to pay attention to. Famous DC is not one of them, right? I mean, we have an audience, a very serious audience that deals with serious issues throughout the day, and we have to come to them and make them want to interact with us, want to champion our work, want to be part of that dialogue. So what we've done through the past several years, we have identified our own champions. We have identified our own super advocates, and we call them brand ambassadors at Famous DC. So you'll see on this slide, there's 3 bullets on here. A lot of what we do in the communications world is simplify things down you can get very congested and very crowded with your messaging. So we spend a lot of time actually simplifying things down. What is your core mission here that you want to do? And as you're developing ambassadors, I think there's 3 steps. And I'll walk through how we do that with Famous DC. Step 1 is identify champions. Now, we send an email out each week. We send 1 email out a week. If you would like to, you should go to famousdc.com and sign up for that, or follow us on Twitter at famousdc. That email goes out Fridays around 2 o'clock to about 20,000 people, primarily, as we discussed, are really focused on politics, media, and digital in Washington. We can see from that who's opening it, who's sharing it, who's clicking it, who's sending it around, who's opening it multiple times. And then we have our social media platforms that we're pushing content out on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. We can see who's sharing that. We can see who's interacting with it. We can see who's liking it. So what we're basically doing is we're having our champions self-identify themselves. And in some cases, as you look at these campaigns and as you look at these big things and these mountains that you have to go climb, you might think, well, we're going to need 10,000 people. We need an army of 5,000 people. We've built Famous DC into a really strong platform, and literally on week to week, we may have a dozen champions. We may have less than that. These are just people that have really responded to our content and are grabbing it and sharing it. So once we have identified who they are, step 2 is you have to activate them and then you have to engage them. What I mean by that is make it very, very easy for them to get involved. You don't want to send them a long 800-word email that could be a white paper somewhere and think that somebody's going to jump to action after that. They're not. People are busy. You're on your phone. You're scrolling through tons of emails and text messages throughout the day, so it has to be easy. So what you do is once you have your champion, say Josh Shaversky is a big fan of Famous DC, and we see that he's interacting with it on social media, we want to send a one-off email to Josh that says, hey, can you share this? Can you forward it to 5 friends? We'd love for you to put this in your newsletter as you're emailing out to the Grassroots Professional Network. We're making it very easy for Josh, who is a busy person, to grab our content and share it. So we're activating Josh, we're engaging with him. So as you're looking through and you've identified your champions, make it very easy for them to activate and engage. And then the third one is to say thank you. You will be amazed at how many people will spend a lot of time trying to get someone to pay attention to their issue, and then they'll take an action, and then they just disappear, and they don't hear from you again. Saying thank you, especially in such a wired and social and digital world that we live in now, it goes a long way. So I had on here, I think somebody may have edited it out because they thought it was a typo. I had thank you and say thank you again. You can't thank somebody enough times. If somebody's taking action for you, this is their free time, and in most cases you're not compensating them. It's just a cause or an issue that they believe in, that they've grabbed, and they're pushing it out as well. So take the time to actually say thank you. And I think Josh has touched on this a little bit previously. There is a gamification to this. We have done different contests on Famous DC, simple things. If you can share this with 10 people, we're going to send you a coffee mug that says Famous DC. If you take a picture with that coffee mug, we're going to send you a packet that's going to have stickers and magnets. People love these little games, and it feels good. It's like when you're on social media and you see who's liked your picture on Instagram, you see who shared it outside of your parents or your friends from high school, and you're kind of excited about it because somebody's supporting you. So we have done that with Famous DC. When we see people that are jumping into action, we want to make sure they're armed with everything. So if Josh likes it and he's sharing it, it's going to be a really short amount of time that Josh is going to have a Famous DC sticker at his desk, a mug, and then hopefully he's going to wear one of our Famous DC workout shirts when he does Soul Cycle with the rest of the Grassroots Professional Network, because we want Josh to be a brand ambassador. And so that's how we have built this through Famous DC, and we apply that to a lot of what we do in our public affairs work, especially a lot of what we do in the coalition work. When we get into the coalition work, usually it's several different organizations or corporations, or in some cases several different trade groups who are coming together really quickly. They have to activate on one specific issue. They may spend 364 days a year fighting each other, but for this one day, we've all united. Let's jump into action. And then what happens is you'll build a campaign for them, but you don't have time to go out and build the infrastructure or find these champions. What you have to do is go to the members of this coalition, and what do you have? Do you have a newsletter that goes out? Do you have a weekly address from the CEO? Do you have an email blast that's hitting? If so, who do you have that are your champions? Who can we activate to jump into this? And then you're going from here, from your coalition to your coalition membership, which in some instances may be trade associations, which then have membership. So you have to make this very quick, very easy for them to activate and engage. And it's something that we spend a lot of time focusing on, and it's a very exciting place to be because this keeps shifting. And I think as we see digital and what digital can bring to this, we're seeing the whole influence game grow with this, and it's something that we spend a lot of time paying attention to. So thank you for the opportunity to be here and share a little bit about that, and I look forward to the questions at the end, Anne.
Okay, great. Thank you, Amos, and thank you again, and no typo, and thank you, Josh. So I'm going to really quickly kind of fly through some of the things that both of the guys have already mentioned. It sort of ties nicely. At the back end of CQ Engage, obviously, we can see a lot of activity happening, and so we've kind of figured out some things due to that, and one of the kind of key things that Josh touched on briefly earlier was this idea of segmenting your list. It's probably, from the group of members or supporters of your organization, it's probably the most or the easiest way of kind of identifying those super advocates that you already kind of have in the bag, and that will allow you to sort of hone your message, obviously. I think Josh also mentioned, there's no point in sending someone who's interested in immigration, asking them to take action on something on healthcare if that's really not what they're interested in. And so this lets you kind of see what they've taken action on before. If you look at your CQ Engage dashboard, you'll see kind of where they've taken the most action, what they're the most interested in, and you can send kind of targeted, relevant emails to them then and relevant asks. And that, of course, is going to ultimately increase your campaign results and help you carve out those super advocates. And just a couple of results, so if a lot of us have to kind of report up through our CEOs who speak only in metrics and the bottom line, and I know that's really hard sometimes in government relations to kind of justify your existence. We have that issue in marketing too sometimes. So these are just some kind of hard numbers that HubSpot, that kind of giant of marketing, figured with segmenting a couple of years ago. And some of the numbers they came up with were that you'll get 39% higher open rates on your emails if you segment properly. You'll have 28% lower unsubscribe rates and a 24% better deliverability and greater revenue. And those are kind of hard numbers, obviously, that you can kind of take to the bank. So back to your super advocates, and what we've seen on the back end of CQ Engage in particular is that about 15 to 20% of your list really wants to do more than just send an email from you, right? For you, rather. So, these are the folks, again, I think Amos mentioned it, they're the ones who will tweet at lawmakers, they'll send an email, they'll sign a petition, they'll make a phone call. And often all you have to do when you look at your dashboard is just find those folks and then just ask, right? You can really beef up your advocacy data if you just ask people. And that kind of plays into this notion of conscious onboarding. So when someone joins your organization as a member or as an advocate, ask them multiple questions. Where do they go to school? What issues are they interested in? You can figure out things like gender and age demographics, and sometimes that will help you when you're trying to kind of hone the message of asking them to take action in a certain channel. Like maybe, I think Amos mentioned the millennials are constantly on their phones, obviously, and they're probably more likely to take action on social media for you. Middle-aged people like myself are probably more likely to send you an email or to send an email and react to that. And we know that there are some demographics or some rather hard kind of metrics to show that older folks are more likely to pick up the phone and make a call for you. So it's important to kind of have all those things in place when you're onboarding, so that down the line you know how to make the right ask to the right person for the right issue. And I'm going to mention just SHRM, who are the Society for Human Resource Management, because they've had a really kind of good way of figuring out their super advocates. And what they have done is, through segmentation and this idea of conscious onboarding, they have discovered the sort of really engaged folks in all 435 congressional districts, and they've turned them into what they call advocacy captains. And these are very much kind of the go-to people when an issue happens kind of at local level or state level. And we know that, particularly in the state legislators, lawmakers don't have big staffs. For the most part, it's just a part-time job. And so they don't have a lot of resources to research certain issues. And when you've got someone who's an expert in that field who you already have a relationship with, well, you're going to go to that person for advice and kind of know-how on how to shape the policy. And so SHRM have been really effective at this. And another thing they have done is they have segmented out 8,000 folks from their general list to kind of who are the ones who are more likely to take action for them on issues. And that's been really useful for them, obviously, down the line and with all the campaigns that they have to run. And this is just an example of one campaign they were running last year, and it was they needed people to comment on a regulation for the review of overtime rules. And obviously, of course, there's a 60-day comment period for most regulations. But by the time, the campaign is in place and everything's up and running, that time can often be cut down to maybe 30 days or 40 days. And so if you already have these kind of self-identified super advocates ready to go, then you're in a much kind of better position out of the gate. And for them, that resulted in 830 individual comments on the regulation and over 8,000 personalized letters sent to the Hill. And, those 830 individual comments, I mean, it's great to get any comments, obviously, but having them from people who are genuinely affected by the issue, who really know the issue and kind of will tell their personal story is much more effective than just kind of that forum comments that you might get. And so, of course, they produced this really high quantity and high quality level of engagement, which was really successful for them. So, you can really learn from the data if you collect that information that I mentioned early on, kind of when you're onboarding your folks, find out kind of what they have in common. I used to work at the Boat Owners Association of America, and, we had, when I worked there, we had 500,000 plus members, but you had everyone from a small boat owner who liked to fish, once a month to people who had mega yachts. And so clearly they have entirely different issues, even though they're all part of the same organization. So that can also be true with particularly, I think, large kind of healthcare organizations. You might have people who are professionals, the doctors and nurses. You can have patients, family members, survivors. Again, all very invested in the organization, but when you break it down, the issues they're concerned about are often quite different. Okay, so when you do find those super advocates, another big thing to do, obviously, is to keep them engaged. You want to keep them educated. So these are the people who are going to read your newsletters. They are the folks who are going to go on your website and see what issues you're kind of tracking. Keep them updated on what's going on. Maybe offer them exclusive access. You can, there can be certain offers or emails that are just for white papers that are just for the people who are really engaged and who are constantly taking action for you. It's kind of the same variation of what Amos was saying with Famous DC, but in a different kind of environment. Like you said, they're special. Tell them that. Thank them, and take time to make that outreach to them much more personalized. I think, Josh, you had some additional resources.
I had a few additional resources. So I produced an article for the PR News Guidebook, The Impact of Social Influencers on Nonprofit and Political Online Fundraising Campaigns. So if you go to PR News Guidebook, that's there. Campaigns and Elections, I've been doing some different articles that are related to influencers and advocacy. We have the PR News PowerPoint, which was from a presentation that I did in Miami. That is a free resources that we'll have available. Why Influencer Marketing Will Explode in 2017. That's an article in Forbes. I would highly encourage you to take a look at that. And then .com disclosure, how to make effective disclosures in digital advertising, and that's through the FTC. And then a few other articles, and then obviously the CQ Connectivity blog.
Okay, great. So I think we have time for a couple of questions. And one thing I did kind of want to ask both of you was, we've talked a lot about kind of the presumption of already having your list, right, and marketing or carving out your influencers or your super advocates from that. But both of you have kind of started organizations from the ground up. So could you talk a little about how you find those people to begin with?
Yeah, I think it's really just your circle. Who do you hang out with in the industry? Who's your mentor? Who are folks that, are low-hanging fruit? Like, you just hang out with them. They're in the industry. They're your friends, and bring them together. When I first started the Grassroots Professional Network, I went to my employer when I was in grad school, asked them to host and sponsor, and then invited 12 of my friends. And, I presented a YouTube clip on the first follower which is the dancing guy at a music festival. And after that, it caught on, and our list, we've done 30 events this year. A lot of our stuff is event marketing, content marketing, and we gain people through that vertical.
So when we started Famous DC, we started it anonymously, intentionally, because we wanted to just write about the audience and hopefully they would start paying attention, not knowing who's behind it. So we started anonymously, and we started with no paid digital ad dollars. So it was tough sledding. I mean, it was slow at first, and I would always go in and check the page views and check how many people, now granted, this was 9 years ago, how many people were coming to the website. And I remember, like, the only people that knew about this were my wife, my buddy Josh, who was doing it with me, and my mom and my brothers. And I remember the first time we had over 100 people come to the site that day, how excited I was. And a couple of days later, my mom asked me, she's like, hey, how's your website thing going? I'm like, oh my God, we hit triple digits. We had 100 people click on it. She was like, oh, I'm so excited. I spent all day hitting refresh on it for you. It was my mom. So I really had like 5 people reading the site, and my mom spent the day hitting F5 to like refresh it 60 times so my view counts went up. So I was excited that my mom was supporting me, but we were not having the impact we thought we were at first. But you bring up a good point, Josh. We started, a couple years later, we started hosting events ourselves. And we were a new brand, and nobody knew who we were. So what we did is we identified our super advocate champions. We went out and found 5 different people. We said, hey, you 5 are going to be our co-hosts. And they came back to us and said, well, what does that mean? Do I owe you money? Do I need to do anything? I'm like, no. You're a co-host, but you have to bring 10 people to this event. And so we had 5 co-hosts for each event, and all of a sudden there's 50 people there. And these were people from different walks of life in Washington, D.C., and from there it grew. So you don't have to start, again, we mentioned the start, you don't have to start with several thousand army strong behind you, let's take the field and go. And it really can start with 2 or 3 people, some of your friends, or in my case, your mom, and grow from there.
I want to follow up on the mom story because I have a similar thing, and it's with ICBA. We started doing Facebook Live segments, and we did our first one, and we got like 1,000 views, and like we were ranting and raving, and there were comments where like people were engaged. My mom shared it on her Facebook, and all of her friends, middle-aged, oh, he's so cute, he's so grown up, and it came up in the staff meeting, and I turned beet red, and I'm like, well, you know what, at least it's getting out there, so they know a little bit more about community banks.
Yeah, so we'll revise this. Step 1, get your mom on board.
Exactly. Never underestimate the power of the mothers, I'll tell you. Okay. So that's really interesting. That's almost like I feel like that's a whole other webinar we could get into. Anyway, you know, what about working with other departments within your organization to kind of identify influencers or identify advocates? I'm thinking, you know, I think you mentioned your executive kind of folks, but what about your board or communications or marketing? Kind of, is there some scope there for getting them on board?
Yeah, you know, I think that they're interacting, membership and communications are interacting with your advocates more than you are. From a grassroots and advocacy standpoint, you might send 1 to 3 action alerts a month and on the high end, but they're communicating in large part every day. So they know the people that are responding. Another good, you know, kind of cross-section is your PAC. You know, PAC donors, they're contributing. They're going to be enthusiastic about public policy and the issues that are affecting them. So I think working with your PAC team and finding those cross-sections is important. But obviously, marketing and communications, seeing people that are opening different things, and a lot of times they have better analytics. I always like laugh at the disparity between budgets in a lot of organizations with marketing and communication versus GR, and you'll see that. So they'll have the better tools, and hopefully they'll let you use their account in government relations, and you can get a better sense of who your audience is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it goes back to something we mentioned earlier. You have to make it easy for people to activate. Mm-hmm. I mean, because the people that are your super advocates, people that are super plugged in, are plugged in because they're busy, right? Like they spend a lot of their time doing things, doing stuff. So when you're going to someone who maybe doesn't sit in the communications department or who's not used to taking action, make it easy. You know, it's got to be quick to the point. Here's what I want you to do it, and I'm going to tell you thank you. So that we have found that because a lot of what we do in our public affairs work for coalitions, you're asking people to engage who are sometimes not used to hearing from you or not used to actually taking this action. So the more you can simplify it down and make the ask so easy, it really helps as you're broadening out your ambassadors.
Something else you mentioned earlier about kind of how, I think with S3, you said you've got kind of the public affairs side and the PR/communications side, and how they all kind of fit together. And is that something you see kind of as a way forward? I feel like I'm seeing that more and more even within organizations, within the GR kind of scope. There is this more kind of communications bent to a lot of what people are doing.
You know, we are seeing more of it, and I hope that trend continues because we bet the whole farm on it. Yeah. You know, we pulled together a government relations firm and a public relations firm and put them into the same house and put everybody into the same offices. So how we set up our office is that each office has a government relations person and has a communications person, sometimes sitting back to back, because we believe that integrated approach is what's working now, because you're watching what used to be 5 years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, you went to Capitol Hill, you spoke to your chairman, you spoke to the chairman's staff director, this got done. That still has to take place, but there's all this other opportunity for activity, and there's so much noise out there that if you're not filling that, your opponents are going to fill that void. So we have seen that, and we think, I think good public affairs today and strong and effective in public affairs campaigns that win are the ones that can take that government affairs guidance and then apply that to the same team through all of your communications as you're talking internally and externally and asking people to activate.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I actually just produced a piece called The Modern Lobbyist, and it talks about the skills and traits that are necessary to succeed in lobbying and advocacy overall, and the evolution of them. So how, you know, previously the direct lobbying, you know, was fairly secluded. There were silos there, but now it's becoming more integrated. You have to have multiple skills, communication being critically important in the written word, writing for different audiences in short form, long form communication, and really trying to make it actionable. And I think that that side of things, of working with the media and working with the public in order to support public policy, you know, enactments or fighting different things is critically important. And if your organization is able to successfully couple those and really attack it from different points, you'll be much more successful if you do it than doing it from a solitary point of view.
Okay, great. Well, that kind of follows something we found ourselves. We did a piece of content a couple of months ago where we interviewed 70 GR folks and advocacy experts, and overwhelmingly the one kind of trait they felt was most important in their job, or the thing they wished they had been better at starting out, was communications, right? So certainly seems to follow along on what both of you are saying. So that's about it, folks. Thank you for joining us again. Thanks to Amos Sneed from S3 and to Josh from the Grassroots Professional Network. And join us next time.